Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Listeners, I'll just say it. Today's guest has some pretty amazing credentials. France Q. Hoang graduated in the top 1% of his class from West Point Academy, earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Washburn University, graduated magna cum from Georgetown Law, passed the bar exam, and oh, by the way, at some point in all of this, also joined Ranger School, I think like 2 days after graduating from West Point, which means that this person is either Superman or a glutton for punishment. And we're going to find out which of those two it is. So for folks that are not aware, Ranger School is the program where selected members of the armed forces train in special missions. As part of that training, they get about 3.5 hours of sleep a night. They eat maybe 2 meals a day if they're lucky. They spent a lot of those days training, carrying 65 to 90 pounds on their back. So as you can imagine, it's pretty grueling to do, especially immediately after leaving a pretty rigorous physical and academic environment like West Point. So clearly, this guy knows how to have a good time. And part of me was thinking this morning as I was preparing for our conversation, I was up at 4:45 to get my awesome day started. But I imagine that France was up at 3:45 this morning, probably went for like a 5-mile run, came home, responded to some email, probably made breakfast for his family, and, is now settling in for some other things to do like this recorded conversation. Now, France is a serial entrepreneur, trading in everything from jets to law firms to co-working space to technology for nonprofits. In fact, he founded a company called Boodle AI to help nonprofit supporters data mine their own social media data and fundraise better. So at some point in our conversation, I'm sure we're going to talk with France about that. But what I really wanted to delve into is his experience in creating organizational culture. He is, after all, a graduate of one of the top leadership programs in the world, and that's West Point. And he also has a couple decades of leading teams in combat, in government, and in the private sector. He has a great perspective on what it means to shape, support, and give life to the ethos of a human structure. So let's jump in. Hey, France, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Dolph. It's great to be here. And to answer your question, I am definitely a glutton for punishment.
I have to say that was absolutely my impression. So you kind of have to share with me what made you decide to make that decision? Like, okay, I'm graduating from West Point, and now I'm going to apply to Ranger School and just jump right in, not take a couple months off.
Yeah, so Ranger School is a leadership school, first and foremost. And the way they teach leadership is by putting people in pretty extreme situations in the sense of you're having to lead your peers, which is the hardest type of leadership. You're doing it in an environment where people are sleep deprived, food deprived, and very stressed. And the idea is if you can lead peers in that situation, you can lead anybody in any situation. As to why I chose to go to Ranger School, I'm originally from Vietnam. So I'm an immigrant. I came over here as a refugee. And growing up, once I learned about my family's history and the role the military played in evacuating me and my family, I knew that I wanted to give back. And the way I chose to give back was by serving in the military. And so I applied to, received an appointment to West Point. And as I went through West Point, just continually thought about those Vietnam era soldiers, right? And the training they went through and the fact that I was following in their footsteps. And that gave me great comfort and inspiration. And I knew from my reading about the soldiers during that time that every officer that went to Vietnam attended Ranger School. And that was a required part of their training. The idea was this type of extreme training would help them better lead their soldiers and better prepare them for combat. And so when a month before I was supposed to graduate from West Point, my officer representative for my branch came to me and says, "Hey, France, I have a present for you." And I was like, "Oh, ma'am, you don't have to get me a present." She goes, No. The present is a slot to the U.S. Army Ranger School. I was like, "Ma'am, that's a surprise." And it was a surprise because normally you spend months training up for Ranger School. It's something you do after you've had some time in the Army. Normally your first kind of basic training, officer basic course. And the slot I was going to go to was 3 weeks away. And the reason was the Ranger School was closing down to my branch, which was military police Corps, and this was going to be the last chance that I would ever have if I wanted to go to Ranger School. And the other condition was I would have to give up all 60 days of my vacation after graduating from West Point, and I'd have to make it through the first time. I couldn't. Normally, when you go to Ranger School, there's 3 phases, and if you fail a phase, you can redo it. Well, in my case, I'd have to give up 60 days of vacation, and I'd have to make it straight through. Despite all that, and having only 3 weeks to prepare, I knew I absolutely wanted to do it because I felt like I was following in the footsteps of those very same soldiers and officers that had served in my home country and helped rescue me.
Wow. First of all, I just have to say, I'm really impressed that not only was it, okay, I've got to go to Ranger School, but here's the pressure and here's why this is going to be a bigger barrier than it is for most people.
Yeah, I think I'm someone, and a lot of folks who go to the military, West Point, Ranger School that way, we're driven by a desire to excel. And in some ways, like the harder something is, the more we want to do it as a way of showing that we can. And Ranger School and West Point, but particularly Ranger School, has a way of finding whatever your weakness is and making you confront that. So whether that's, you have physical limitations, whether, you don't deal well with sleep deprivation, whether you have some kind of weakness in your leadership style, or you have some kind of technical or tactical weakness, whatever it is, rather than simply avoiding it, which is easy in everyday life, right? The military and Ranger School makes you confront it and deal with it in a stressful environment.
So you mentioned that Ranger School is a leadership training program. What leadership things did you learn at Ranger School that you maybe did not learn at West Point or earlier in your life?
Oh, that's a great question, Dolph. So at West Point, West Point is an academy. It's 4 years long. They teach you. It's a comprehensive program. There's an academic component. The academics are, as hard as an Ivy League school. There's certainly a leadership training component from day one to the day you graduate. You're learning about leadership. It's the world's premier leadership institution. And then there's an athletic and physical component, right? Everybody, when I went through, every male cadet had to box. We all had to take gymnastics. We all had to pass swimming. Much to my chagrin, I actually did not know how to swim until I showed up to West Point. So I was a little bit shocked and surprised when I found out I had to learn to swim to graduate. Despite all that, I didn't have to do it in this sort of intense pressure cooker environment, and kind of do it for real, right? In the sense that while it wasn't combat, Ranger School is the closest thing to combat the U.S. Army puts together. And in fact, the joke often is when you're in combat, people say, well, at least I'm not in Ranger School. And having served in Afghanistan and deployed as a peacekeeper to Bosnia, I'll tell you, I did some, very hard things in combat, but Ranger School prepared me for those things because it just puts all those things on top of one another, right? It's the having to have road march 15 miles while you didn't sleep the night before, and then all of a sudden being thrust into a leadership position, like literally a Ranger instructor turns to you and says, okay, Ranger Hoang, now you're in charge, and you have to figure out where you're at, what the mission is, how your soldiers are doing, what's the next step to take, who your other leaders are, organize everyone, make a plan, rehearse, and then execute that all on the fly. And while I did parts and components of that while at West Point, having to do it all together taught me a lot about just myself, right? And I'll give you a short story because that's all very kind of pie in the sky. So in the very last phase of Ranger School, I had passed my final patrol, so I was going to graduate, and I was on the final field exercise. And towards the end of the field exercise, in order to pass Ranger School, you have to pass a patrol in every phase. And I had passed my patrol. I knew I was going to graduate, but there was a ranger who had not passed the patrol, and they were trying to get him to graduate. And so they gave him another patrol. And we're in the swamps of Florida, and all of a sudden, the ranger instructors throw artillery simulators, and they sound like artillery coming in. And what you're supposed to do is do a battle drill where the person in charge yells a direction and a distance, and everybody runs that far in that direction. And the platoon leader yells 150 meters, 12 o'clock, which means go straight ahead 150 meters, right, about 500 feet. And everybody just groans. And the reason they groan is he hadn't been thinking 150 meters at 12 o'clock put us straight up a hill. And so everybody's carrying 50 to 60 to 100 pounds of gear. And now we're all having to run up this hill. And the RIs get annoyed at him because he's not moving fast enough. And so they announce that he's dead, right? So he's hypothetically dead, and he kind of falls to the ground, and everybody's running past him. And I look and I was like, why is everybody running past him? Well, they're running past him because nobody wants to carry, this ranger student who made a bad decision, his 160 pounds up this hillside. And in that moment, I made a split decision. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to leave this guy here. That's not right. And so I throw my pack to somebody else, and I rig up a sling, and I put him on my back, and I haul him this 500 feet up the side of a hill, because I just didn't think it was right. And I didn't have to do that, but I'm glad I did, because it taught me something about myself, right? Like, what am I going to do when I'm tired and hungry and stressed? Do I do the right thing? Do I not do the right thing? And it's incredibly valuable to be put in positions where you have the opportunity to exercise choice and to make those choices.
So in nonprofits around the country, how do we help team members have experiences where they have to make decisions like that, where the risk is not as high, much like in Ranger School, you're not yet in combat. But also keeping in mind that in the nonprofit sector, it would be really tough to say to everybody, okay, strap 80 pounds on your back and run up this hill.
Yes. So every organization has a culture, whether you choose to create one or not. The culture is both a mix of nature and nurture. And what do I mean by that? So culture starts with who you hire, right? People's individual values, who they are, what they learned. That's the nature part of it. And the rest of it is nurture. And nurture comes from two places. It comes from the way people treat one another, and it comes from the organization's leadership. And nurturing culture requires both courage and leadership. So if you're not willing to take a stand on anything, then you're not able to affect your organization's culture, and the culture is going to be dominated by those individuals who are executing or exhibiting leadership and courage. And that may be the clerk in the mailroom who everybody talks to, and he makes comments about how your nonprofit is doing. And literally that person is the primary influence in your culture. Why? Because they're exercising leadership and courage, and they're standing for something. And so culture at the end of the day is what leadership stands for. And part of that is giving people the freedom to make choices, and then explaining how that culture or how those decisions align with the culture. And so what do I mean by that, right? So one of the things I do when I onboard new people in my organization is I tell them, I want you to make mistakes. And that always strikes people as like, I can always see way like new employees look at me kind of funny, like that's not what I expect my boss to say to me on the first day. I go, but I want you to make mistakes, because that means you're taking risks. That means you're taking responsibility, you're exercising initiative. And if you do those things, the result is sometimes you're going to get it wrong and you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And I want you to learn from them. I just don't want you to repeat those mistakes, right? And then what I do is as quickly as possible, I try to figure out where I can put that employee in a position where they can take responsibility for something they don't feel comfortable about. I hope they make a mistake, and then I back them on it. Because what you do matters more than what you say, and what you say matters more than what you write. In other words, you might have a great culture statement, like a value statement or a mission statement organization, but if the reality of what you say the organization stands for every day to day is different than that, people are going to believe what you say instead of what you write. And most importantly, how do you treat people, right? If I say, I want people to take risks, but the first time somebody makes a mistake, I bite their head off in front of everybody else in the organization, guess how many risk takers you're going to have the next day, right? 0.
I've got to share a quick, great story with you. When I was a development director almost 20 years ago, I made a decision, and I fully admit this, I made a decision that was a bad decision, and it cost us about $15,000. And I had to go into my boss's office and essentially own it and say, I made this decision 3 months ago. It was a bad decision, and it cost us $15,000. And she was awesome, because she essentially was like, well, I need you to explain to me what you learned from it and what you're going to do differently next time. And it's a $15,000 training expense for you. And it was like, I mean, literally, I was like, okay, I'm going to get written up, and this is going to be an issue. And she really handled it really well. And admittedly, I did learn from it. I've not made that same mistake since. And I think that's what's so critical. It's like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's just not okay to make the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah. And you probably told your fellow employees, right, other people in the organization, the way your boss treated you and how tolerant she was of your mistake and how supportive she was of your education and learning. And that, right, that peer-to-peer talking about the organization, that's how culture is created, right? It's not a PowerPoint slide shown once a quarter at the team meeting, right? That's just words on a piece of paper. It's culture is built every day with every action and every statement, and also every inaction and every silence. So if an employee does something that goes counter to the culture you want to create as a leader in the organization, and you don't say or do something about it, guess what? That action or that statement now has become accepted. And so it's really important to also speak up, right, when things happen that are not a part of your culture, or you don't want to be a part of your culture.
Right. And I'll share with you the other way that I think she was really strategic in kind of saying, okay, this was a learning experience for you. So the first is, at the time I was bringing in a few $1 million a year. So $15,000 out of a few million, it really is kind of, okay, this is a training expense. But the second is I was also managing the development team, and there were, 5 or 6 employees on the team, and I was a relatively young manager. So the other thing she was doing is she was kind of mentoring for me, like, okay, when you have someone who comes in and makes a mistake and they own it, here's what you need to say to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to rewind though, because you kind of, no offense, France, I got the utmost respect for you, dude. I got the utmost respect for you. But you kind of glossed over okay, it's really important that you, in recruitment, and that you hire right. And I could not agree with you more. My best and worst decisions as a leader have been the people that I've brought onto my team. So let's really unpack that for a minute and talk about how you hire right, not just in terms of skills, but in terms of those soft skills and the culture fit that you're trying to build.
Yeah, I think there are 3 things, right, a leader of an organization absolutely has to do. One of them is provide strategic vision and direction. Second is make sure there's enough money in the bank. But the third is hire the right people. And I think of those 3 tasks, they're all equally important, but I put a strong emphasis on that third one, hiring the right people. There's kind of this belief that, if we hire a decent employee, then we can train and motivate them and get them to perform well just by the way we kind of shape, right, their activities. And I think that's actually not the right approach. Like people perform and excel when they are in the right job, in the right organization, with the right culture, working for the right people, doing the things that they're passionate about. And so your role as a leader in hiring is to find somebody where there's a fit across the board. And then your continuing role as a leader is, if that person isn't, it turns out those things are not a fit, figure out how to get them into a place where they're the right fit, right? It's the idea of, do we use compensation and bonuses or incentives to change behavior, right? Or do we use it as a way to keep the right people in the right seat? So, I believe that you need to bring the right people on the right bus and get them on the right seat right away. And then everything else follows from that. So, if you hire somebody and it turns out they're in the wrong job, they're working for the wrong person, maybe they're in the wrong organization, then you need to fix that as soon as possible. But those conversations, right, begin at the first part. In other words, part of hiring needs to be checking, hey, this is what our culture is. Like, start those conversations literally the moment somebody walks in the door, and ask, the potential employee, how do you feel about that kind of culture, right? And ask probing questions and find out what their experience is, because they are part of the nature, their values are going to be part of your culture when you hire on. And so I think hiring for cultural fit is just as important as hiring for, do they have the right experience? Do they have the right technical skills? Is the compensation structure right? In fact, I would start with culture, and if they're not a cultural fit, then none of the other things matter.
And I'll share with you, I think so often, and I don't think this is intentional, but I think so often hiring managers lie because they want to put a good face on the organization. And so, for example, maybe the culture really is a pressure cooker. But they'll say to potential candidates, oh, we believe in, life-work balance, and most people go home between 5 and 6, when in reality, most people go home between 6 and 8. And, and so now someone signs on thinking they're going to get one thing and they get another. And so I think a lot of it, you're 100% right, is like the hiring manager being really upfront with candidates and saying, this is what our culture is, and then trying to assess whether the candidate just wants a job or if the candidate wants to be a part of this team.
Right. So I'll share a story with you. One of the companies I was on the founding team of, Mag Aerospace, famously during its early days and continues to be built around a culture of performance. So the values of MAG are serve, win, perform, with a heavy emphasis on performance. And part of the pitch to potential recruits was, look, you've probably been in many organizations where out of 10 people, 5 are dead weight, 2 or 3 are carrying their weight, and you are the rock star, right? You are the person, the one or, the top 10, 20% that makes up for everybody else. And could you imagine being part of an organization where everybody is part of that 10 or 20%, is drawn from those 10 or 20%, and you're going to have to work harder than you ever worked in your life just to keep up with your peers? And when you tell people that, one or two things happen. Either people say, oh no, that sounds too pressure filled, that sounds stressful, I don't want to be a part of that. Or they say, sign me up, that sounds awesome, I can't wait for that. And that's great. People self-select, right, are given an opportunity to self-select in the kind of organization they want. And by selecting themselves into that organizational culture and knowing that's what they're going to join, they are choosing to become part of that. And in fact, they're choosing to enhance that. And I think part of MAG's success, and people often ask, like, why was MAG so successful in the period of 8 years? It managed to, go from a startup to over 300 million in revenue, double in size 4 years running. Much of that was driven by the culture of performance that started with the CEO and went down to, every single person in the organization, down to the newest recent hire, because that culture of performance was what we led with when we interviewed people and recruited them.
So obviously the hiring manager and the hiring teams were looking at this in their interviews and their recruitment. But in your startups, what are some of the structural things you did around recruitment to make sure you had people that were really committed to winning and to moving the ball forward?
So it's important, I think, in a small team, in a startup, right, when you're talking, less than a dozen people, every hire is so important. So even more important than in a big organization. And so you got to put even a more primary emphasis on hiring for culture. It's also important that people get along, because you're just around each other all the time, right? And startups in particular are very intensive environments. And so in the startups I've been a part of, at the beginning, basically everybody's part of the hiring team. Like, I think when we made our first 10 hires and a couple of the founding teams I'm part of, everybody gets a chance to participate in the interviews, even if it's just 5 minutes, just to touch people. And it's also important to, I think, allow the recruit, the potential employee, to have a chance to talk to somebody that's not part of the hiring process per se, right? Not the CEO or the hiring manager. To have, hey, here's our junior marketing person. Here's their phone number. You can talk to them. They make no hiring decision. They're just here as a source of information. So you can ask the questions that you don't feel comfortable asking me to make sure this is a good fit.
Yeah, it's funny. Back when I was a permanent executive director, I reached a point, because I can be rather intense, and I'm aware of that. And so I reached a point where, for direct reports, I would say to them, you can look on our website and see everyone is a direct report of me. And just like I'm going to be checking your references, I'd suggest you call some of them and ask them what I'm like to work for. And some people really would call back and go, oh, I'm not interested in the position anymore. And I'm like, great, this is perfect. We're not a good fit. I'm glad we know that now.
Yes, absolutely. There with folks of a military background, we often are fast to hire because we want to see the best in people, and then slow to fire because we feel like it's a leadership failure if someone doesn't work out, and we want to train and coach and mentor. And I do believe in the power of those things, and we have a responsibility as leaders to make sure our employees have every chance to succeed. But in many cases, the failure to perform is because there isn't a fit between the culture, the role, the supervisor, maybe even the organization itself. And so the key thing is to move people right to where they can succeed. And it's better to get those things right in the first place. So I think the best hiring practice is actually the opposite. Be very, very slow to hire. Take your time to make sure there's a fit across the board on all those cultural components. And then be very fast. I say fire, but I don't really literally mean like terminate someone, but be fast to change people, the role they have, right? Maybe they need to report to someone else. Maybe you need to tweak their set of responsibilities. Maybe their work environment. Find a way to get that fit, right? Be fast to change things to get the person to a place where they can perform and excel.
Right. And I will admit, with people who are moderate performers, but I realize that they're not the right fit for the team and they're probably not going to become top performers. I've even had conversations where I've kind of had to say, it does not feel like this is a good fit. Here's why. I think you should be looking. Let's talk about what it is you want to do, and let's talk about a timeline. And, for me, while sometimes you do have to fire, you just do. To me, the ideal is to kind of support someone in that transition and hopefully give them a little bit of a soft landing. Not in that you're giving them a payout, but you're giving them the opportunity, as long as they continue to do their job and do it well, to find another job.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Dolph. I think too many times employees and employers think there's some kind of adversarial relationship, like either you work for me or you're dead to me, right? I think a much better approach is, look, I want an employee who's passionate and performing, and you, frankly, right, as an employee, want to be in a place where you're performing and you're passionate. So our interests are actually totally aligned. Now, it may work out that it's not you in this job for me, in which case, let's work together. Let's find you a place where a role, whether it's in this organization or another, where you're passionate and feel that you can perform. And I want somebody who is passionate and is performing in this role. We should work together to move towards that goal.
And the other thing, I feel really strongly this way, as employees or team members, we have all found ourselves in places where we're not a good fit and we're typically miserable. And, and I think to own that with the other person and say, hey, I once had this job where I was not a good fit and I hated coming to work and it just sucked. And I don't want you to experience that. And, and how I finally changed it was I changed my job.
Yeah, I think having candid discussions with people like that is not just right, but also refreshing, right? Because I think too often those are hard conversations, or we make them hard when they actually don't have to be. Hey, what's going on? I noticed you're not yourself. I noticed that, the first opportunity you have to leave, you leave. You don't strike me as someone who's passionate about what you're doing. You just tell me what's going on, right? I'm not going to be mad or upset. I honestly just want to understand because I care.
Right. So now let's transition over a little bit to Boodle AI. So you have started this new for-profit company that is marketing to the nonprofit sector. And it's obviously marketing its service to the nonprofit sector. How have you recruited and created a culture that may or may not be different because you're really interfacing with nonprofits?
So I'm part of the founding team. So I have two other co-founders, Eric Okamoto and Sean Olds. All three of us attended West Point. All three of us served in the military. All three of us have been part of mission-driven organizations, and all three of us have known what it's like to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And we bring that set of values and experiences of service with us to Boodle AI. And Boodle itself is actually a West Point term. When you're at West Point, everything in your room has a place. If you're lucky enough to have your friends and families send you treats or desserts in the mail, then you keep it in a box up high in your closet, and it's called the Boodle box. And Boodle refers to things that are hard to find, very scarce, but very desirable. And so when we built the company, we just loved that term, Boodle. When as and really, I have to give credit to Sean and Eric. I was with other companies and only recently joined Boodle as a full-time executive. They've done a marvelous job of recruiting people that share our passion for service. The incredibly talented team at Boodle, frankly, could all be doing something else, but they're choosing to build Boodle because they're passionate about what we're trying to build, right? Which is AI assistance to help nonprofits acquire new donors and to fundraise. And the idea of being able to help nonprofits achieve their mission better by having to spend less time on fundraising efforts and to get more out of those efforts they do undertake and currently undertake, that's something we could all get behind. And when we recruit, the number one thing that people say after they see their platform and we talk to them about why, when we ask them, like, why do you want to join Boodle? The comment we get back is, we love the mission. We love the idea of supporting and working with nonprofits. And when people say that, we know they're a good fit for us because that's what drives us as well.
So I got to unpack a couple things because you just said at least three things that I think are really scary for a lot of people in the nonprofit sector. Not everybody, but a lot of people in the sector. First of all, artificial intelligence. Second of all, fundraising. And third of all, talking to others about donors. So let's unpack all of that, but maybe we'll save artificial intelligence for the last. Well, actually, sure. I guess we kind of have to hit that first. So what is the Boodle AI, which of course is artificial intelligence? What is it doing?
So we build AI assistants that can take the data that a nonprofit already has and build a model of what a likely donor looks like for that particular nonprofit. So we basically unlock the power of the nonprofit's own data to build a model that says, hey, this is what your donors look like. Then we can take that model and use it to power an AI assistant that we provide to the nonprofit's fundraisers. And then they can take that assistant and unleash it on their own contacts in social media. And the assistant identifies who in that fundraisers networks looks like the nonprofit's best donors. And then the fundraiser chooses who they reach out to, and Boodle's AI assistant then suggests messaging. So it basically makes it easier for fundraisers to fundraise, right? The big friction points in fundraising is, well, gosh, who am I going to ask? How am I going to ask them? And how am I going to find time to do all that? Because I'm a busy person, which are all fair questions and all friction points we deal with fundraising. And I myself, I serve on multiple nonprofit boards. I've participated in capital campaigns, 7, 8, 9 figures. I have helped with bringing in major gifts. I've made major gifts. I participated in peer-to-peer campaigns and raised 6 figures. So these are all things that I have kind of personally felt the sweat and the pain and the suffering going through. And so I wanted to build a tool that I would use, right, as a fundraiser. And I get asked all the time, hey, would you raise money for this organization, that organization? And I have to scratch my head and think, gosh, well, who would donate to XYZ nonprofit? But now we've built a tool that answers that question for the fundraiser. And then answer the question of, well, what should I say to them? And puts it all in a nice, tidy package where, in the span of 30 minutes, I can reach out to, 50 to 100 people if I wanted to.
So let me also just be clear. I think when you're saying fundraiser, you're meaning both paid and volunteer fundraisers. So
correct. It's
fundraising, yeah, like fundraising committee members, board members, your development staff, et cetera. And even staff members who are not in development who wanted to could essentially use Boodle AI to crawl their social media and figure out who they know who might support.
Yes. And we've also built the tool to be used by your peer-to-peer volunteer fundraisers in a way that one of their concerns is, of course, privacy, right? Like, sure. I mean, as a board member, I've been asked by development staff, like, hey, would you just share your contact list with us and we'll search through it and tell you who you know that could provide a major gift? And I'm like, wow, I don't know. As much as I want to support your organization, that feels like a big ask. Well, with Boodle, right, Boodle can examine someone's contact list without ever sharing it back with the nonprofit. And in fact, we keep every fundraiser's data separate and compartmentalized. We never sell or share or track use their personal data. We protect those contacts from the nonprofit, and we never reach out to fundraiser contacts unless they choose to.
I have to say that is super cool, especially in this day and age where, let me back up. We batch record the podcast, but what's been in the news a lot lately is the Facebook Age Yourself app that a lot of people are using that is Russian owned, and how you're giving up a lot of your privacy by doing it. So it's really cool that you all are focusing on privacy.
Yes. All three of the co-founders, myself, Eric, and John, we have lived under a code of honor. West Point famously has this honor code to connect, will not lie, cheat, or steal. And so really, it might sound a little quaint, but we really do believe in doing the right thing. And we wanted to build a product that was valuable in itself. We're not building a product in order to gather analytics and sell that. We're not building a product to get people's eyeballs and sell ads. The platform is marketed and used by nonprofits, and they provide it to their fundraisers, and that's it. We're not monetizing people's data, to other people, which is unlike, I think, many platforms. There's a saying: if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And frankly, platforms want people's either data or their eyeballs for advertisers, and that's how they make the money. That is not how Boodle makes its money.
Right. And I absolutely get that saying. It's one of the reasons why in my own consulting practice, in my own personal life, like I pay for my own email service, other than the social media that I'm on, I pay for every online service I have because I do not want to be the product.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. France, we have got to wind down, but I also have to ask you the off the map question. I always know it's a great recorded conversation when I've got to try to squeeze in the off the map question. Obviously, you are someone who is passionate about your work. You've worked in a variety of different fields, and I have a feeling that you probably spend a lot of time at work. So the off the map question for you is, tell me about your favorite vacation.
My favorite vacation. That's a great one. Before I married my wife, we took a 10-day trip to France together. And actually, we weren't engaged at the time. This is kind of the trip you take with your person you think you might want to spend the rest of your life with, but let's just try to spend 10 days together and see if we can tolerate each other first trip. I think a lot of people do that. And we ended up going to Paris and then going to Normandy and then going to Saint Michel and then Burgundy. And it was such a great trip. First of all, we're in France, which is always awesome. But second, it was a great mix of things that she was passionate about, things I was passionate about, and things that we were passionate about together. And learning about each other's passions, I think, helped us learn about each other and cemented the decision that, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person.
That's really awesome. But, also Paris is one of the most romantic cities in the world. So it's kind of hard not to think in Paris, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. So you picked a good venue for it. That's
right. Well, maybe I was trying to stack the deck a little bit there.
I love it. That is absolutely awesome. France, I just want to say it has been amazing talking to you today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your thoughts about organizational culture and recruitment with our listeners. Now, I also want to make sure that folks know how to find Boodle AI, and it's pretty simple. You're just going to go to boodle.ai. That's boodle.ai. They can also find you on Twitter. I just followed you on Twitter, and it's FQ Hoang. That's at FQ Hoang, and Hoang is spelled Hoang. Hey, France, thank you so much for coming on.
Dolph, it's been great to be here. Really appreciate your time.
Listeners, if your favorite podcast listening place is in your car, do not try to scribble France's information or Boodle AI's information on that old styrofoam coffee cup you should have thrown out 3 years ago. All the contact information can be found at our show notes today at successfulnonprofits.com. Now, when you get where you're going, please consider doing me a favor by subscribing to this podcast on whatever listening platform you use. Also consider doing me another favor by rating and reviewing the podcast while you're there. Now, technically, I think I just asked for 3 favors, but hey, what can I say? I'm asking you for 3 favors. That's our show for this week. I hope you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive in a competitive environment.
I am not an accountant or attorney, and neither I nor the Goldenberg Group provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. This material has been provided for informational purposes only, is not intended to provide, and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. Always consult a qualified, licensed professional about such matters.